VTubers shouldn't be entertaining. So why are they? In order for me to explain, let's go back to streamers for a second. What makes streamers popular? If you're like a majority of people, you probably came to the conclusion of personality being the main driving force that makes streamers entertaining. And you're not wrong. Personality plays such a big role, especially when it determines the type of appeal the channel offers. Which is why VTubers don't make sense, because VTubers don't have that ability to fully express their personalities. What do I mean by this? Well, let's start by defining what a personality means. According to personality psychology, specifically the Big Five model, personality is characterized by how someone reacts emotionally, how consistent they are, and how they behave across different situations. So things like behavior, emotion, and thought, which VTubers have. But the outlet or body that helps express that personality is through facial expressions, micro reactions, physical presence, and unfiltered and voluntary cues. Something that VTubers do not have. So VTubers don't make sense not because they lack personality, but because they detach personality from the human body. Some may argue that VTubers are able to move their bodies, which is true, but it's processed. It isn't natural. Everything is controlled, and through this processed form of displaying personality, it loses its involuntary authenticity. Think about it. When a real streamer gets surprised, they might lean back, widen their eyes, hesitate for a second, maybe even stumble over their words. That reaction isn't just what they say, it's how their body reacts without them thinking. Now, compare that to a VTuber. The reaction is still there in the voice, but the body either doesn't react, or it reacts in a way that feels delayed or exaggerated. It's not that the emotion is gone, it's that the physical authenticity of that emotion is reduced. The absence of embodied expressions within VTubers is exactly why VTuber popularity makes absolutely no sense. Here's another example. Imagine two speakers on a stage talking about dinosaurs. Speaker A uses everything: tone, pauses, humor, and body language. He gestures, shifts his posture, and physically emphasizes what he's saying. Speaker B has the same voice, the same humor, the same timing, but he doesn't use his body at all. He just stands there. Who do you think would be more engaging? Speaker A, right? But that's what's confusing. For some reason, Speaker B is performing just as well as Speaker A, if not better. I mean, look at Iron Mouse. She beat Kai Cenat in having the most subs on Twitch. Even though VTubers have such a disadvantage, they are competing with some of the best streamers. This means that somehow VTubers have figured out a way to thrive despite having an incomplete personality. As I was looking for a possible explanation behind their success, there wasn't really anything apparent that explained how VTubers have been so successful. Until I noticed one extremely odd pattern that you as well might notice if you look at all the top VTubers. Exactly. All the top VTubers are female. Yo, what does this mean for us? It means we're all gooners for watching these damn VTubers. On a real note, what's important isn't that they're female, but their audience. The gender percentage of the audience of a VTuber depends on the gender of their character. For example, Iron Mouse's audience is majority male, while Astel from Hollowstar's audience is majority female. But why is this important? Why does the gender of the VTuber's audience so consistently line up this way? This pattern reveals that VTubers aren't just consuming content, they're responding to something deeper, a controlled, low-risk form of personal interaction that feels emotionally satisfying. However, it's not just the regular personal connection, because regular streamers are also able to provide that. It's a personal connection that is psychologically shaped by how we engage with the opposite gender. VTubers have tapped into some kind of pocket of connection with viewers that there really isn't a word for. It's not a full-on parasocial connection, but it's also not a watching for purely entertainment purposes either. If I were to give it some kind of label, I would call it a controlled intimacy. A form of connection that feels personal but is consistent, low risk, and carefully maintained. Now, this then begs the question, if this is really about intimacy, then why don't lewd, just chatting streamers completely dominate? After all, those streams are far more direct, far more explicit, in some cases, too intimate. And to be fair, they do see success. But here's the difference. With those types of streams, the interaction is clearly defined. When you click on it, you know exactly what you're there for. The intention is obvious to both the creator and the viewer. There's no ambiguity. But VTubers? VTubers exist in a much more ambiguous space. You're not there for intimacy, at least not officially. You're there to watch games, to listen to karaoke, to enjoy collaborations, just like any other streamer, right? But that's where things get interesting, because VTubers don't remove that layer of intimate, personal feeling interaction. They actually embed it inside something that looks like normal entertainment, and that changes everything. Because now, the viewer doesn't have to consciously justify why they're watching. The experience feels casual, it feels normal, feels like just content. But underneath that, there's still this consistent, low-level sense of personal engagement with the opposite gender. And that's what makes it powerful. It's not overwhelming, it's not explicit, doesn't demand anything from you. It just sits there, subtle, consistent, and easy to return to. And when you combine that with a persona that aligns with what the viewer is naturally drawn to, you end up with something that's far more sustainable than direct intimacy, because it doesn't burn out. It doesn't feel excessive, it just feels normal. VTubers don't make sense. They're missing a core part of what makes people engaging: embodied expression. The subtle, unconscious ways we react, move, and exist physically. And if personality is what makes streamers entertaining, then VTubers should be at a disadvantage. But they're not. And that's because they're not playing the same game. VTubers aren't just competing through personality, they're compensating for what they lack by tapping into something else entirely. And the biggest clue was that pattern we talked about earlier. The fact that audiences consistently skew toward the opposite gender of the VTuber. That's not random. It tells us that viewers aren't just watching content, they're responding to a person-shaped presence, one that aligns with how they naturally engage with the opposite gender. Not necessarily in a romantic way, but in a way that feels socially familiar. And that's the key, because VTubers take that kind of interaction and they refine it. They remove the risk, the unpredictability, the awkwardness, and what you're left with is something that feels personal but never overwhelming. A kind of controlled intimacy, a connection that feels directed at you even when it isn't. And when that's paired with a persona people are naturally drawn to, it becomes incredibly easy to engage with, and even easier to come back to. So VTubers don't succeed because they're more expressive, they succeed because they found a way to deliver connection without the downsides that real connection usually comes with. And maybe that's why they work. Not because they're more real, but because they're more controlled. And for a lot of people, that might actually be better.